The streets of Brunswick had a calm, almost sleepy rhythm that February afternoon. Spanish moss swayed gently from the oak trees lining the suburban streets, and the sunlight, softened by thin clouds, cast elongated shadows across well-kept lawns. For most residents, it was just another ordinary Sunday, but for Ahmaud Arbery, 25, it was just another run, one that would shatter the tranquility of this quiet neighborhood and eventually grip the entire nation. Arbery, a former high school football player and known local athlete, laced his sneakers, slipped on his white t-shirt and black shorts, and stepped out of his home. His breathing was steady, his pace controlled. Running was not just a hobby, it was a part of his identity, a ritual that gave him clarity. As he jogged past familiar streets and neighbors' homes, a sense of freedom enveloped him. He waved at a few familiar faces, nodded at a passing car, and enjoyed the rhythmic sound of his feet pounding against the pavement. Unknown to him, his presence had already attracted attention. A few blocks away, Gregory McMichael, a retired investigator for the Glynn County Police Department, and his son, Travis McMichael, watched from their truck. Both men were armed, Gregory with a handgun, Travis with a shotgun. Their eyes tracked Arbery as he ran past, and they exchanged a knowing glance. They believed he matched the description of a local burglary suspect, a belief based on assumption, not fact. The father-son duo decided to follow. They climbed into their truck, engines rumbling softly, tires crunching on gravel as they pulled out behind Arbery. In another vehicle, a neighbor, William Roddy Bryan, joined the pursuit, camera phone in hand. The tension was invisible to the unaware jogger, but for those watching, the air seemed thick with anticipation and unease. As Arbery ran, the chase intensified. He glanced over his shoulder at the truck trailing him. Confused at first, he then realized the threat was real. The McMichaels' pickup swerved slightly to block his path. The moment was surreal, like something out of a low-budget crime movie, but there was nothing cinematic about the fear now racing through Arbery's mind. Each step he took brought him closer to potential confrontation, and every heartbeat felt like a countdown. The streets that had been so familiar now seemed alien. Shadows of trees merged with the outline of the pickup truck, creating a disorienting, almost predatory landscape. Neighbors peeked from their porches, unsure what was happening. Some assumed it was a domestic argument or a minor crime, but few grasped the gravity. For Arbery, the chase was a struggle for survival, each turn and sprint amplifying his urgency. Then, in a sudden and chilling escalation, the truck stopped directly in his path. Travis McMichael stepped out, shotgun raised. Arbery hesitated for a fraction of a second, instinctively aware of the danger. The two men faced off, one armed, one unarmed, with the weight of misunderstanding and fear hanging heavily in the air. Bryan's camera captured every second, unflinching and raw, the kind of footage that would later horrify millions. A tense moment stretched into eternity. Arbery attempted to sidestep the truck, seeking any opening to escape, but the father-son duo closed the gap with precision, and the confrontation became inevitable. In those seconds, a decision was made, a fatal, irreversible action. The sound of gunshots shattered the calm. 3 explosive cracks echoed through the neighborhood, bouncing off houses, trees, and fences. Arbery fell to the ground. The rhythmic sound of his running ceased abruptly. Silence enveloped the street, interrupted only by the faint whir of engines and the heavy breaths of those involved. The shock was immediate. Witnesses would later describe the scene as surreal, almost unreal, an ordinary suburban neighborhood transformed into a crime scene in seconds. As the men retreated into their truck, uncertainty replaced confidence. Did anyone outside realize what had just occurred? Did they understand that an unarmed man had just been shot while jogging? The streets, once peaceful, now carried the heavy weight of tragedy and fear. From his porch, a neighbor whispered into a phone, capturing the first hints of a story that would explode beyond the quiet neighborhood. But for Arbery's family, the moment was incomprehensible. Wanda Cooper Jones would later recount a flood of emotions, disbelief, anger, heartbreak, as she learned that her son had been chased and killed without warning, without justification. The implications were already stretching beyond Brunswick. Questions of race, law, and justice began to hover in the background, though few could yet grasp their full weight. How had a routine jog turned into a deadly confrontation? Why had armed civilians felt justified in pursuing an unarmed man? And in a quiet neighborhood, had tragedy struck with such suddenness? As emergency responders finally arrived, the scene was chaotic but eerily quiet. The echoes of gunfire faded, leaving only the harsh reality of loss. Evidence would be collected, testimonies taken, and the story would gradually unfold. But the first part of this narrative, the moment that set the stage for a national conversation, was complete. Arbery's life, filled with promise, friendship, and simple routines, had been violently interrupted. The streets of Satilla Shores, once ordinary, now bore witness to a crime that would ignite outrage, demand justice, and challenge an entire community to confront uncomfortable truths. The quiet suburban afternoon was forever transformed into a haunting reminder that sometimes danger lies not in the unknown, but in assumptions, fear, and the decisions people make in split seconds. And for the world, the question remained, how could a young man, simply out for a jog, be pursued and killed in blind daylight without immediate consequences? The answer would take months to emerge, but the story of Ahmaud Arbery had already begun to capture the hearts, minds, and outrage of a nation. In the days following Ahmaud Arbery's death, the streets of Brunswick were filled with a strange tension. The quiet suburban neighborhood of Satilla Shores carried the weight of tragedy, yet the official response seemed disturbingly muted. The father and son who had pursued Arbery, Gregory McMichael and Travis McMichael, remained free. Local law enforcement, relying on statements from the McMichaels themselves, had accepted their version of events: a citizen's arrest, a confrontation, self-defense. For weeks, no arrests were made. In homes across the neighborhood, whispers of disbelief and anger circulated. Many wondered how a young man could be chased, cornered, and killed without immediate legal consequences. The situation became more perplexing and more disturbing when law enforcement emphasized that the McMichaels had acted within their rights. To Arbery's family, the message was clear: their son's life had been undervalued. Wanda Cooper Jones was devastated. The grief she felt was compounded by confusion and frustration at the apparent inaction. How could my son be killed in broad daylight, and yet the men responsible still walk free? She asked, her voice heavy with sorrow. Friends and family rallied around her, urging patience, but patience was hard to find. The silence from authorities felt like a betrayal. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating throughout Brunswick and beyond. People questioned whether Arbery's race had influenced the response, or lack thereof. The young man was black, fit, polite, and well known in the community, yet the system seemed indifferent to his death. The McMichaels, white residents of the neighborhood, claimed they were acting on suspicion of burglary, but no evidence suggested Arbery had committed any crime. The community's frustration grew into organized outrage. Local activists and journalists began investigating the case, piecing together witness accounts and timelines. Phone records, dash cam footage, and neighborhood observations started painting a picture that clashed with the McMichaels' narrative. Each piece of information added pressure on law enforcement to act. Tensions escalated when the video recorded by William Roddy Bryan, initially submitted to investigators but not widely disclosed, began leaking online. The footage captured every terrifying moment of the chase. Arbery, jogging peacefully, became the hunted. The McMichaels, armed and determined, confronted him. The struggle, brief but fatal, ended in gunfire. Once the video reached the public eye, outrage exploded. Social media platforms were flooded with posts condemning the killing. News outlets picked up the story, framing it not as a local incident, but as a reflection of broader issues: race, vigilantism, and systemic injustice. Citizens across the country demanded accountability, highlighting the glaring disparity between Arbery's treatment and the law's response. As the story spread, politicians and civil rights organizations took notice. Questions were raised in state legislatures and national media. Advocates criticized the initial inaction of the Glynn County Police Department, pointing out that the McMichaels had not only pursued an unarmed man, but had been free for weeks afterward. The case became a lightning rod for discussions about race and law enforcement in America. The McMichaels narrative, citizens' arrest, fear, self-defense, began to unravel under scrutiny. Witness accounts contradicted key elements of their story, and the video evidence made their actions undeniable. Even those sympathetic to the concept of neighborhood watch found it difficult to justify the chase, the confrontation, and the use of deadly force. The pressure mounted. Eventually, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation stepped in, taking over the case from local authorities. Investigators worked quickly, gathering evidence, reviewing the video, and interviewing witnesses. The slow pace of the initial investigation was now replaced with urgency. Warrants were issued for Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Roddy Bryan. In Brunswick, the reaction was electric. The streets buzzed with conversations about justice, race, and morality. Residents debated whether the law had been applied fairly and how the case would influence other similar situations. News crews set up near the neighborhood, and interviews with Arbery's friends and family painted a portrait of a young man full of potential, whose life was brutally cut short. Yet, despite arrests, the story was far from over. Public interest had transformed this case from a local crime to a national discussion. For Arbery's family, each day brought a mix of relief and anxiety: the comfort of seeing the legal system finally respond, and the lingering fear of what a trial might bring. Every new detail added layers of complexity. The community struggled with grief, anger, and disbelief. How could a neighborhood chase escalate to murder? How could it take months for authorities to act? And how many others might have suffered similarly, but without a video to expose the truth? The case also highlighted the role of technology in modern justice. Without Bryan's cell phone recording, the story may never have reached the wider public. The footage became the linchpin for public outrage and the catalyst for legal action. People across the nation watched the video, sharing it widely, demanding justice, and sparking conversations about vigilantism, race, and accountability. By the time the arrests were made, the narrative had already begun to take on symbolic weight. Ahmaud Arbery was no longer just a man killed on a suburban street. He was a representation of the larger issues that America continues to confront. His story forced citizens to examine uncomfortable truths about race, law enforcement, and personal responsibility. As Part 2 concludes, the stage was set for a courtroom battle that would captivate the nation. The chase, the shooting, the weeks of inaction, and the leaked video had transformed a local tragedy into a national reckoning. The investigation, once slow and opaque, had now become the opening act in a drama that would demand answers, confront biases, and test the principles of justice in Georgia. Arbery's family prepared for the next phase, determined to see accountability achieved. The nation watched, divided between outrage, empathy, and a yearning for justice. And the question lingered, haunting and unrelenting: could the law truly protect the innocent when society itself had failed to act? 2 months after Ahmaud Arbery's death, Brunswick, Georgia, and the nation were still grappling with disbelief. Questions of accountability lingered, and the community simmered with frustration. But the moment that would ignite national outrage had already been captured on a simple cell phone, a recording by William Roddy Bryan. The video was brief, raw and harrowing. It showed Arbery jogging through the Satilla Shores neighborhood, a familiar and ordinary sight, until the McMichaels truck appeared behind him. Travis McMichael, shotgun in hand, stepped out, blocking his path. The unarmed young man, realizing the threat, tried to evade confrontation. He ducked, sidesteps, and attempted to move past the truck, his feet pounding against the pavement in desperation. But the pursuit had escalated beyond control. Brian's camera captured every second with a chilling clarity. The father and son cornered Arbery, and in a matter of seconds, the encounter turned deadly. Gunshots rang out. 3 sharp cracks shattered the stillness of the suburban street. Arbery collapsed. The video ended, leaving a haunting silence that lingered far beyond the frame. Once leaked online, the video spread like wildfire. Social media users were the first to react, sharing, commenting, and debating within hours. The footage was impossible to ignore. Millions of Americans watched the raw, unedited confrontation, the chase, the struggle, the fatal outcome. Public sentiment turned quickly from curiosity to outrage. The video forced people to confront what had been abstract suspicion, the reality of a young black man pursued and killed in broad daylight in a neighborhood where he was known by armed residents who assumed guilt without proof. News outlets across the country seized the story. Headlines blared, "Jogger killed in Georgia, video sparks outrage," and "Citizens arrest or murder, the Ahmaud Arbery case." Anchors replayed the video frame by frame, dissecting the sequence of events. Legal analysts debated whether the McMichaels' actions could ever be justified under Georgia law. Civil rights activists organized protests, calling for justice, accountability, and systemic reform. The pressure on law enforcement became immediate and intense. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation took over the case from local authorities. Investigators meticulously examined the footage, interviewed neighbors, and revisited witness statements. The McMichaels' earlier claims that they were conducting a citizen's arrest in self-defense began to crumble under scrutiny. The video showed Arbery as unarmed, running, and cornered. Their fear and suspicion were not supported by the evidence. What had been framed as a lawful intervention was now unmistakably a deadly pursuit. The case now had 3 defendants: Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Roddy Bryan. The arrest warrants were issued quickly, and the men were taken into custody. For Arbery's family, it was a bittersweet moment. Relief mingled with sorrow. Justice was finally moving forward, but it could never undo the loss of a son, a brother, and a friend. National attention continued to build. The Arbery case became a symbol of broader issues in American society: race, vigilantism, and the inequities in the application of justice. Commentators, politicians, and ordinary citizens debated the implications. Many pointed out that if the video had not existed, the case might never have reached this level of scrutiny. The incident highlighted the power of citizen documentation and social media to hold people accountable when official systems fail. Meanwhile, in Brunswick, local residents struggled to process the whirlwind of the tension. Some feared further division in their community. Others used the spotlight to demand change. Arbery's friends and family began giving interviews, painting a picture of a man full of life, ambition, and kindness. They described his love for running, his bright personality, and his commitment to community. The contrast between his humanity and the violent circumstances of his death struck a chord with viewers across the nation. The courtroom preparation began in earnest. Prosecutors meticulously built their case around the video, witness testimony, and the timeline of events. They aimed to prove that the chase and shooting were not acts of self-defense, but deliberate and unlawful. The defense sought to portray the McMichaels as fearful and reactive, but the footage provided a damning visual record. Each frame contradicted their claims and bolstered the prosecution's narrative of unjustified pursuit. As public interest surged, the narrative took on symbolic weight. Arbery was no longer just a victim. He became a representation of the struggles Black Americans face when confronting vigilantism and systemic bias. The case prompted debates not only about the law, but also about societal assumptions that can place certain groups at risk simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. For months, discussions dominated media cycles. Opinion pieces, podcasts, and social media threads explored every detail, from the legal intricacies of citizens' arrest laws in Georgia to the broader implications for race relations. The video itself became a tool for education, outrage, and reflection. Teachers, community organizers, and activists used it to highlight the consequences of unchecked assumptions and prejudices. The McMichaels and Bryan faced the undeniable fact that their actions, captured in unflinching detail, had shifted from a local incident to a national conversation. Each day in custody, each media update, and each public reaction amplified the tension leading to the trial. Citizens across the country waited, emotionally invested, knowing that the courtroom would now serve as the stage for both accountability and moral reckoning. By the time the trial commenced, Arbery's story had already left an indelible mark on American society. The video, once just a recording on a phone, had become evidence, narrative, and symbol all at once. It forced the public, the media, and the legal system to confront uncomfortable truths, the deadly consequences of racial bias, the dangers of vigilantism, and the gaps in systems meant to protect citizens. For Arbery's family, the national attention was both painful and necessary. It meant that his death would not be ignored, that the world would see what they had seen in person, and that justice had a real chance of being served. And for the country, the case had become more than just a single tragedy. It had become a lens through which Americans could examine morality, law, and equality. By the time the trial began in 2021, the story of Ahmaud Arbery had captured the attention of the entire nation. Brunswick, Georgia, a quiet coastal city that had once seemed ordinary, was now the epicenter of a tense and highly publicized legal battle. Every detail of that February afternoon in 2020, the chase, the confrontation, and the fatal shooting, was dissected in court, replayed in meticulous detail, and examined under the scrutiny of both the jury and a captivated public. The courtroom itself was charged with emotion. Journalists from across the country filled the seats, cameras lined the walls, and spectators craned forward, waiting for every word to be spoken. Friends, family, and neighbors of Arbery were present, their faces etched with grief and anticipation. Outside the courthouse, protests and vigils drew hundreds, uniting people in a shared call for justice. The trial had become more than a legal proceeding. It was a moral reckoning, a national confrontation with issues of race, vigilantism, and accountability. Prosecutors opened with a compelling narrative. They painted a vivid picture of Arbery's final moments. A young man jogging through his neighborhood, chased by armed residents, cornered, and ultimately shot in broad daylight. They emphasized that he had been unarmed, that the McMichaels had made no attempt to verify his identity or intentions, and that Bryan's recording captured the truth with unflinching clarity. Every frame of the video, every witness account was presented to reinforce one central argument. This was not self-defense, it was murder. The defense, in contrast, tried to argue fear and lawful action. The McMichaels claimed they were acting on suspicions of burglary and attempting a citizen's arrest. They described a moment of panic, a fear for their own safety, and a misunderstanding of events that had escalated beyond their control. But the video, unedited and indisputable, painted a different story. Arbery was running, unarmed, cornered, and the McMichaels pursued him deliberately. Their narrative of fear collided head-on with the reality captured on Bryan's phone. Witnesses took the stand, recounting the events of that day with precision and emotion. Neighbors described seeing Arbery run down the street, the truck blocking his path, and the sudden confrontation. Friends and families shared intimate details about Arbery's character, his dedication to fitness, his gentle nature, his love for life. Each testimony humanized him, reminding the jury that the young man in the video was not an abstract figure, but a real person whose life had been brutally cut short. The prosecution also highlighted the premeditation of the chase. The McMichaels had armed themselves and pursued Arbery for several minutes, with Brian joining the pursuit while filming it on his phone. The deliberate nature of the pursuit undermined the defense's claim of spontaneous fear. It was, prosecutors argued, a calculated act with deadly consequences. Throughout the trial, the video played repeatedly, each viewing more haunting than the last. The jury watched Arbery run, cornered by the truck, and the struggle that ended in gunfire. Gasps and murmurs could be heard in the courtroom, the tension nearly palpable. Outside, the public followed the proceedings closely, understanding that this evidence was the keystone for justice. Family members, particularly Wanda Cooper-Jones, bore the emotional weight of the trial. Every piece of testimony, every replay of the video forced them to relive the trauma. Yet they remained resolute, knowing that their presence and their voices were crucial in seeking accountability. Their strength became a symbol of resilience and a rallying point for the community. As the trial progressed, the prosecution methodically dismantled the defense's arguments. Legal experts in the courtroom explained that even under Georgia law, a citizen's arrest could not justify the use of deadly force in this situation. Evidence of prior suspicions, neighborhood patrols, or fears could not legally excuse the deliberate pursuit and shooting of an unarmed man. The McMichaels' actions, in legal terms, were indefensible. Finally, after weeks of testimony, cross-examinations, and deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the decision aloud. Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Roddy Bryan were found guilty of murder and felony murder charges. Relief, grief, and vindication washed over Arbery's family. The moment was bittersweet. They had achieved justice, but it could never bring back the son, the brother, the friend they had lost. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was immediate and profound. Supporters and activists celebrated the verdict, calling it a victory not only for Arbery's family, but for justice and accountability nationwide. Civil rights organizations hailed it as a crucial step towards addressing systemic issues, while journalists reflected on how public pressure and viral evidence had forced the legal system to act. For Brunswick, Georgia, the verdict marked a pivotal moment. The quiet streets of Satilla Shores, once the scene of tragedy, had become a symbol of vigilance, advocacy, and the power of truth. The case demonstrated the critical role of citizen documentation, social media, and public engagement in shaping justice. It also sparked broader conversations about race, law enforcement, and community responsibility that resonated far beyond the state. In the aftermath, Arbery's family continued their advocacy, honoring his memory through initiatives promoting justice and equality. The case became a teaching moment, referenced in discussions about racial bias, citizens' arrests, and the consequences of assumptions and vigilantism. Arbery's life, though tragically cut short, had left a profound impact, transforming him into a symbol of resilience, accountability, and the ongoing fight for justice in America. The story of Ahmaud Arbery was no longer just a local tragedy. It was a national reckoning, a cautionary tale, and a testament to the consequences of fear, assumptions, and systemic failures. For viewers, readers, and citizens across the country, it served as both a tragedy and a call to action, a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, can prevail when truth is brought to light and voices refuse to be silenced. As the courtroom emptied and the streets of Brunswick slowly returned to routine, one reality remained. The impact of that fateful jog would be remembered for generations. The video, the investigation, and the trial had forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about race, justice, and morality. And though Arbery could not speak for himself, the truth of his story and the justice achieved in his name would continue to resonate, a lasting reminder that accountability matters and that the pursuit of justice is never truly complete until the truth is fully seen.